Sefu's hand tightened around the wooden handle of his street broom as his second son shouted, "Throw that filthy old man away from the entrance." Rainwater ran through the gutters of Nairobi's financial district. Neon lights shook in the puddles like broken promises. None of his sons recognized him beneath the stained uniform, the bent back, the grey beard, and the trembling hands. Then, just as a guard shoved him toward the road, a homeless man stepped between them, raised his bruised chin, and said, "If you want to humiliate someone, start with a man who still remembers what mercy looks like." In that instant, Sefu realized the cruelest test of the night had nothing to do with wealth. Tell me honestly who reveals their true character faster, the rich son protecting his status or the poor stranger protecting another man's dignity. And where are you watching from right now? Drop your country and local time in the comments. If stories about truth, justice, and redemption move you, subscribe and stay with us. By sunrise, Nairobi looked scrubbed raw. The rain from the night before had washed dust into the drains and left the city smelling of wet concrete diesel and damp jacaranda bark. Men in reflective vests moved along the sidewalks with carts and shovels. Women opened kiosks with sleepy eyes and quick hands. Matatus began honking before the sky had fully turned gold. And on the edge of Kimathi Street, beneath a torn cap and a faded municipal jacket, Sefu Mwangi pushed a broom through puddles and felt the ache in his shoulders like a sentence. For 40 years he had built things that touched the sky: glass towers, toll roads, housing projects, logistics parks, clinics with his name on the marble wall. Now he was invisible. It was the first honest thing that had happened to him in years. No driver opened a door for him. No assistant rushed over with coffee. No board member called him visionary. People crossed in front of him as if he were a crack in the pavement. A young man in a suit nearly stepped on his broom and did not even turn his head. A woman dropped a tissue near his boots and walked away, confident someone like him existed to erase signs of people like her. Sefu kept sweeping. His sons were due at headquarters by 8:30. He knew their routines with the precision of a man who had once mistaken control for love. Quito would arrive first. Always first. Crisp charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, dark glasses, even when the sky was cloudy. He liked being seen entering buildings. He liked receptionists straightening their backs when he walked by. He liked the sound of hurried respect. Jelani would arrive next. Never rushed, never loud. He would greet guards by name, ask one polished question about their families, and leave behind the impression of warmth without the burden of sincerity. Of the 3 boys, he was the one people trusted fastest. Sefu used to be proud of that. Now he was beginning to wonder whether charm was simply cruelty with better manners. Tao would be last if he came at all. His ties were rarely straight. His shirt sleeves were usually rolled. He drove too fast, laughed too loudly, and spent too much of his energy trying to prove he did not care what anyone thought. He was the disappointment of family dinners and the subject of many silences. Yet lately Sefu had noticed something unsettled in the young man's eyes. Shame, perhaps. Or hunger. Not for money. For direction. At 8:23 a black SUV glided to the curb. Quito stepped out first, exactly as expected. He was tall like his father, broad-shouldered, and beautiful in the hard, expensive way that made weakness seem offensive. He glanced at the wet pavement, then at the workers near the entrance, as if the city had arranged an insult in his path. "Why is this still dirty?" he snapped at a facilities supervisor. "We have foreign partners arriving this morning. Do you want them walking into a slum?" The supervisor murmured an apology. Quito's gaze slid across the line of workers and landed briefly on Sefu. It was a flat look, cold, dismissive, annoyed by existence itself. "Move him farther from the main doors," Quito said. "The smell alone is enough to damage the mood." Sefu lowered his head and kept sweeping. He had heard harsher words in boardrooms, from competitors, from politicians, from men who smiled while arranging ruin. But hearing contempt from his own blood felt different. It did not strike the ear. It struck memory. He saw Quito at 12 crying because a stray puppy had been hit near the school gate. He saw Quito at 16 standing too close to him after his mother's funeral, saying nothing, needing everything. He saw the years after that, filled with tutors, ambition, entitlement, applause, and the slow corrosion of pity. The boy had not been born this way. No one was. At 8:31, another car arrived. Jelani emerged in a navy suit with no tie, elegant without effort. He carried no visible tension. He never did. His face was smooth, his voice measured, his smile light enough to feel accidental. One of the reception staff brightened when she saw him. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Achieng," he said softly. "You look exhausted." "Early shift again." She laughed, flustered. "Yes, sir. You should ask HR about rotating schedules. People work better when they're treated like people." The line was perfect. Too perfect. A guard nearby smiled with grateful admiration. Sefu watched the performance and felt something heavy gather in his chest. Jelani made kindness look effortless because he had studied its surface the way other men studied balance sheets. As he approached the entrance, Jelani noticed an elderly cleaner struggling to drag a leaking waste bag away from the stairs. For one hopeful second, Sefu thought he might help. Instead, Jelani turned to the supervisor and said in a lowered tone, "Please manage these things before they become visible. Compassion is good. Disorder is not." Then he stepped over the dirty water without letting it touch his shoes. Not cruel, Sefu thought. Worse. Precise. By 8:45, Tao came roaring in on a motorbike that clearly did not belong outside a corporate tower. The guards exchanged looks. One of them almost smiled. Tao removed his helmet, ran a hand through his hair, and cursed when he saw mud splashed across his trousers. He looked too young and too tired. His eyes darted to Quito already inside, then to the upper windows where Jelani's office lights had come on. He rolled his shoulders as if preparing for a fight that had begun long before this morning. As he strode toward the entrance, he nearly collided with Sefu's broom. "Sorry," Tao muttered automatically. He took 2 more steps, stopped, turned back. For a moment, father and son stood less than 2 meters apart. Tao squinted at the bent old cleaner, frowning as though some distant instinct had stirred, and then slipped away. "You should stand under the awning," Tao said. "You'll get sick out here." It was not kindness. Not yet. But it was not nothing. Before Sefu could answer, Quito's voice cut through the lobby from inside. "Tao, if you're done chatting, some of us are actually working." The softness vanished from Tao's face. He looked embarrassed to have been seen pausing for a cleaner. He shoved his helmet under his arm and walked in without another word. Sefu exhaled slowly, a scrap of human feeling, then fear, then retreat. That was Tao's pattern. Reach, then recoil. He swept until noon. At 1 o'clock, when the staff lunch hour began, Sefu slipped into a narrow service alley beside the underground parking ramp and took out the old phone hidden inside his sock. It vibrated once before the call connected. "Mama Zawadi," he said quietly. On the other end, his long-time aide answered in the same calm tone she used in crises. "I was waiting. Tell me." There was no need to explain. She knew which world he meant. "Your sons met separately this morning," she said. "Not together. Quito has been pushing procurement heads to approve a security expansion around head office. He says the city is becoming bad for investor confidence. Security, yes. More barriers, more removals, less access around the public frontage, meaning the poor would be pushed farther away so wealth could feel cleaner." Sefu said nothing. Mama Zawadi continued. Jelani met with legal. Closed door. He requested files from the family trust and the succession committee. He used the phrase stability planning. Sefu's grip tightened on the phone. And Tao. A pause. He was late to his strategy review. He didn't speak much, but after the meeting he argued with Quito in the corridor about a sanitation contractor. Quito wants the city vendors removed from the district before the quarter-end investor summit. Tao said the displacement would cause backlash. Did he say it was wrong? No, Mama Zawadi said. He said it would look bad. The words landed like stones. Even Tao then still measured pain by optics. Sefu closed his eyes. I also checked the internal donations ledger, she added. The family foundation announced a public feeding drive next week. He almost laughed. A feeding drive. Give them soup with one hand, steal their pavement with the other. Keep watching, he said. Everything. Legal operations, trust structures. Especially Jelani. I already am. When the call ended, Sefu put the phone away and leaned his head back against the wall. Above him, the city hummed with commerce. Deals, deliveries, deadlines. Somewhere behind the tinted glass, his sons were making decisions that changed the lives of people whose names they would never bother learning. He used to think succession was about capability. Who was sharpest? Who was toughest? Who could preserve growth, command loyalty, smell weakness in a room? Now dressed in another man's exhaustion, he was beginning to understand the true question. Who could hold power without becoming diseased by it? The answer terrified him. Late in the afternoon, as office workers poured out in waves, Sefu returned to the pavement in front of headquarters. Quito exited first, speaking into his phone about asset consolidation. Jelani came after, laughing softly with two investors. Tao lingered behind a lone expression, unreadable. 3 sons, 3 tailored silhouettes, 3 versions of the future. Quito glanced at a child weaving through traffic to sell chewing gum and recoiled as if poverty were contagious. Jelani slipped a folded note into the child's hand without breaking conversation, earning a grateful stare from everyone who saw it. Tao watched the child run off, then stared at his brothers with something close to disgust. Sefu swept in silence as the evening light bled orange across the towers. For the first time in his life, he did not feel like the owner of the building behind him. He felt like a witness standing outside his own failure. And somewhere beneath that grief, another feeling began to rise. Not just disappointment, dread, because by the end of the day, he knew one thing with painful certainty. His sons were not merely fighting for his empire. They were already becoming men who might destroy it from the inside. That night, Nairobi changed its face. The business district emptied first, shedding polished shoes and office perfume. Then the food carts rolled in. Charcoal smoke drifted between alley walls. Music thudded from minibuses idling at corners. Rain began as a whisper on metal roofs, then thickened into a steady curtain that turned headlights into trembling spears of gold. Sefu had not planned to stay out so late, but plans belonged to men with chauffeurs and dry collars. The old street sweeper the city believed him to be had no such luxury. By dusk, the municipal supervisor had barked new instructions at the sanitation crew. A drainage channel near River Road had overflowed, sending black water and floating rubbish down toward a row of kiosks. The older workers grumbled. The younger ones laughed bitterly. Then they all bent to the work because hunger did not wait for better conditions. Sefu worked with them until his palms burned. By 9 o'clock, his back felt splintered. The fake hump beneath his uniform had rubbed raw against his spine. His knees were stiff. Water had soaked through the thin soles of his borrowed boots. The smell around the drainage trench was foul enough to sting the throat. He had spent a lifetime giving orders in meetings about waste flow, urban resilience, and sanitation optimization. None of those phrases had prepared him for the physical humiliation of pulling plastic bags and rotting sludge from a blocked gutter with his bare hands. He finished last, By then the other workers had scattered toward buses, cheap lodgings, or families waiting with late meals. Sefu stood alone beneath a broken street lamp, rain dripping from the rim of his cap. The city no longer looked like an empire he had helped build. It looked wounded. Patches of neon blinked over cracked pavement. Shop shutters rattled in the wind. Somewhere a woman laughed too loudly, the sound already half swallowed by thunder. He reached into his pocket for the energy bar Mama Zawadi had hidden there that morning. It was gone. Maybe it had fallen into the drain. Maybe someone had lifted it. Maybe he had imagined having it in the first place. He was suddenly fiercely hungry. A small thing. An ordinary thing. Yet the feeling shocked him more than the insults had. Hunger stripped away abstraction. It made morality immediate. It made every passing smell cruel. Roasted maize, fried cassava, meat turning over coals he could not approach without risking recognition. He had signed checks worth millions while eating imported fruit from crystal bowls. Now he stared at a street vendor's grill like a desperate child. He told himself to walk. Instead, he found his legs carrying him toward a narrow alley behind a row of closed electronics shops. A rusted awning jutted out from the wall, offering a triangle of dry space. Several men were already there, wrapped in coats, sacks, or blankets that had forgotten their original colors. One old woman sat with her back to the bricks, her eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. A teenage boy held a plastic crate over his head to block the rain blowing sideways. And at the far end of the awning, sitting cross-legged on an upside-down bucket, was Baraka. The homeless man looked up before Sefu could step away. "You again," Baraka said. His voice was calm, almost amused. He was in his 40s, maybe older, though hardship had a way of erasing exact years. His beard was uneven. His jacket had been stitched in 3 different places with thread that did not match. One cheek still carried a fading bruise from the guards outside Mwangi Holdings, but his eyes were awake, steady, watching the world without begging anything from it. Sefu lowered himself carefully against the wall a few feet away. "Seems the rain likes both of us." Baraka snorted. "Rain likes no one. It just reminds the rich they have roofs." For a moment neither man spoke. Water drummed on tin. Somewhere nearby a radio crackled through static. 2 stray dogs fought over something in the darkness, then vanished. Sefu tried not to look at the paper packet in Baraka's lap. Tried and failed. Baraka noticed. Of course he noticed. He unwrapped the paper slowly. Inside was half a loaf of bread already damp at one edge and a small roasted sweet potato split down the middle. It was not a meal. It was survival divided into pieces. Baraka tore the bread cleanly in 2 and held one half out. Sefu stared. "No," he said automatically. "That's yours?" Baraka kept his arm extended. "And your stomach belongs to someone else." Sefu almost smiled despite himself. "You don't even know me. I know enough." Baraka tilted his head. "You sweep too long without stopping. Your hands are soft in the wrong places. You say thank you like a man who was taught by nuns or diplomats, and you are too proud to ask for food. That usually means you need it badly." Sefu took the bread. It was tougher than he expected. Slightly sour. Rain had touched it. He had eaten in Michelin-star restaurants in Paris, at state banquets in Johannesburg, at private dinners in Dubai, where desserts were flown in from Italy. None of those meals hit him the way that stale bread did, because every bite came wrapped in humiliation and grace. "Thank you," he said, quieter this time. Baraka split the sweet potato and handed him the smaller half. Sefu shook his head. "I've taken enough." Baraka shrugged. "Then take enough." Sefu accepted it. Warmth spread through his fingers first, then his chest, not from the food, from the shock of being seen by a man who had nothing. Under the awning the others pretended not to watch, but Sefu could feel the atmosphere shift. Sharing mattered here. It set rules more powerful than wealth. It told the group who had a place and who did not. "What's your name?" Sefu asked. Baraka chewed slowly before answering. "Baraka." "Sefu," he said, using his real first name before he could stop himself. Baraka glanced at him sharply. "Sefu." The name sounded wrong in this costume. Too clean, too deliberate. Sefu felt a pulse of alarm, but Baraka only shrugged. "My father used to say names can be prayers," he said. "Yours means sword, doesn't it?" Sefu nodded. "And yet here you are with a broom." The words might have been mocking, but they were not. They carried a strange, quiet sympathy, as if Baraka knew too well how quickly life could change the shape of a man. Sefu looked away. "And your father dead?" The reply was plain. Finished, no invitation for pity. Sefu hesitated. Family Baraka stared out into the rain. For a while Sefu thought he would not answer at all. Then Baraka rubbed his thumb along the seam of the paper wrapping and spoke without looking at him. "I had a wife once," he said. "Lindaiwe." She laughed like she did not believe in punishment. "We had a son. Kamo. He used to line up bottle caps and call them trains." A faint smile touched his mouth, then vanished. "I had a small house. Not much, but it was ours." Then a project came. Roads, warehouses, relocation promises, new opportunity, all those beautiful words men use when they want poor people to disappear politely. Sefu felt his throat tighten. Baraka continued, voice steady in a way that made it worse. There were meetings, forms, delays, money missing, complaints ignored. Some of us spoke up. I was one of them. "You worked there?" Sefu asked carefully. Baraka's eyes slid to him. Sharp again. "Measuring." "Yes," he said. "Engineering support. Site oversight." I was stupid enough to believe signatures meant accountability. I thought if I documented the false compensation figures and missing materials, someone higher up would care. "And did they?" Baraka laughed once. It was the coldest sound Sefu had heard all week. "They cared very much," Baraka said, "about silencing it." Rain hit the awning harder. The teenage boy at the far end curled tighter around himself. The old woman kept praying. Sefu forced his voice to remain even. "What happened? I was accused of skimming project funds." Baraka shrugged with one shoulder. "Convenient? Neat. By the time I realized how high it went, it no longer mattered whether I was innocent. My name was Dirt. I was arrested. We lost the house. My wife took our son and went to her sister's people up country. When I got out..." He looked down at his hands. The trail was cold. Shame travels faster than truth. Sefu could not swallow. The city around them seemed suddenly built on bones. "Did you ever find them?" he asked. Baraka did not answer immediately. His jaw hardened. When he finally spoke, the voice was lower. "I found where they had gone. Too late. There was sickness, not enough money, not enough medicine, not enough me." He drew in a slow breath. "Grief is expensive. Some people cannot afford to keep living with it in a house." The meaning landed with brutal clarity. Lindiwe and the boy were gone. Sefu stared at the wet pavement between his boots because he could no longer bear to look at the man beside him. Every project report he had ever signed flashed through his mind in fragments. Compensation schedules, land transfer approvals, risk assessments, executive summaries. He had prided himself on vision, on scale, on velocity. Move fast, build bigger. Trust the system beneath you. Trust. What had trust cost this man? What had it cost his family? Thunder rolled above the city long and low. Baraka leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. "Funny thing," he murmured. "I used to hate beggars. Thought they had surrendered. Thought discipline was enough to keep a man standing. Then life taught me there are traps designed for people who believe rules will protect them." Sefu's fingers tightened around the last piece of bread. He wanted to speak, to say something worthy of the confession he had just been given, but every possible sentence sounded cheap. So he asked the only honest question left. "Why did you help me?" Baraka opened his eyes. "You looked like a man the city had finished chewing," he said. "I know that face." Then he added almost lightly, "And mercy is cheaper than regret. Old man, best to spend it while you still can." The words struck Sefu harder than any accusation, because under the grime, under the rain, under the bent shoulders and the false beard, Sefu Mwangi understood a terrible truth. The man sharing bread with him was not broken by poverty. He was broken by injustice, and somewhere in the machinery of that injustice, perhaps much closer than Sefu dared imagine, his own name was waiting. The next morning, Nairobi woke under a hard white sun. The rain had vanished so completely it felt like a lie. Pavements steamed, puddles shrank into oily stains. The glass face of Mwangi Holdings reflected the sky with such polished arrogance that no one looking up would ever imagine the filth trapped in the gutters below it. Sefu was already there before 7. His municipal jacket clung to his shoulders, still damp in places from the previous night. The fake beard itched. His lower back ached from sleeping badly on a borrowed mattress in a cramped workers' hostel. Mama Zawadi's people had arranged without asking questions. He had eaten nothing but weak tea and a bruised banana. Yet none of that occupied his mind. All he could think about was Baraka, Baraka's wife, Baraka's son, the vanished project records, the phrase Baraka had used with quiet venom, all those beautiful words men use when they want poor people to disappear politely. Sefu had built an empire out of beautiful words. Sustainable development, urban renewal, economic acceleration, regional growth corridors. He used to admire language that could move investors. This morning each phrase felt like perfume sprayed over rot. He swept in slow lines near the main steps and watched the city gather itself into commerce. Delivery bikes rattled past. Secretaries in bright dresses hurried through security barriers. Junior analysts walked in pairs, rehearsing presentations under their breath. 2 women selling mandazi from a basket had taken up their usual corner near the outer fence, along with an old man who repaired phone chargers under a crooked umbrella. Further down the curb, a thin mother with a baby tied to her back arranged packets of peanuts on a cloth. They were part of the ecosystem of the district. Unlicensed, uninvited, essential. By 8:15, security staffing doubled. That caught Sefu's attention immediately. New guards took positions at the gate, larger men in dark uniforms with expandable batons and the relaxed cruelty of people hired to make others disappear. One of the facility's supervisors moved nervously among them with a clipboard, speaking fast, pointing toward the pavement vendors, then toward the front entrance. A corporate event, Sefu guessed. He did not have to wait long to be proven right. At 8:28, Quito arrived. He stepped out of his car in a deep blue suit phone already pressed to his ear, annoyance sharpening every movement. He did not greet anyone. He did not look at the workers. He scanned the frontage, once saw the vendors, the sweepers, the repairman, the mother with the peanuts, and stopped dead. "No," he said into the phone. "Absolutely not." He cut the call and turned to the security lead. "What is this?" The man straightened. Sir Quito spread one elegant hand toward the pavement. This circus. We have a delegation from Johannesburg and 2 infrastructure ministers walking in here at 9. Why are these people still at my entrance? Not the entrance. My entrance. The words made Sefu's grip tighten around the broom handle. The security lead cleared his throat. City pavement, sir. We've been told removals are sensitive unless county. I don't care about county. Quito snapped. I care about optics. Clear it. The vendors heard him. Of course they heard him. Poverty teaches people to hear danger under polite tones. The old phone repairman froze. One of the mandazi sellers began gathering her basket with trembling fingers. The woman with the peanuts tried to lift her cloth bundle and the baby at the same time. Her movements were too slow. Quito noticed that too. He gave a thin smile devoid of warmth. Now. The guards moved. It happened quickly, too quickly for dignity. A baton struck the umbrella pole and sent it clattering. A tray of mandazi tipped onto the pavement. The old repairman cried out as his wires and chargers scattered into the gutter. The mother with the baby tried to explain something. Maybe that she would leave, maybe that she only needed a minute. But one guard kicked aside her cloth and packets burst open like tiny pale bones across the ground. Sefu took one step forward before stopping himself. Not yet. He was here to see, to know, to test. But watching felt less like discipline now and more like cowardice. The peanut seller bent frantically trying to salvage what she could while balancing the baby on her back. One guard shoved her shoulder. She stumbled to her knees. The child began to scream. And that was when Baraka appeared. Sefu did not see where he had come from. One moment the curb was chaos. The next, the homeless man was there moving fast, despite the bruise still dark on his cheek from the earlier confrontation. He stepped between the kneeling woman and the advancing guard and held both hands open. She's leaving, Baraka said. Can't you see the child? The guard sneered. Move! She's picking up food. Move! Baraka did not move. His clothes were ragged. His shoes were split at one side. He looked like a man society had already discarded. Yet the line of his body was steady, protective, unafraid in a way that did not come from strength, but from the exhaustion of having nothing left to protect, except what was right in front of him. Quito saw him and recognized him instantly. You again, Quito said, voice dropping with disgust. Is this your profession? Defending garbage. The words were loud enough for the staff near the lobby to hear. Several turned. No one intervened. Baraka kept his eyes on the guard, not Quito. A child is not garbage. Quito's expression hardened. You people always do this. Create scenes, then act offended when order is enforced. You mean when poor people are humiliated so rich men can feel clean? The sentence landed like a slap. A few heads turned sharply. The reception staff at the glass doors stiffened. One junior employee looked as if he might smile from sheer shock, then quickly masked it. Quito stepped closer. For the first time, Sefu saw something naked in his eldest son's face. Not just contempt. Enjoyment. The sour thrill of having power over someone who could not safely answer back. You should be careful, Quito said softly. Men like you vanish every day in this city. Baraka gave a tired little shrug. Men like me vanished long before you were born. Quito nodded once to the guard. That was all. The blow came fast. Not a baton this time. A fist to the stomach driving Baraka backward. He folded gasping. Before he could fully recover, another shove sent him crashing against the curb. The old repairman shouted. The baby wailed harder. One of the mandazi sellers began pleading in Swahili for them to stop. The words tumbled over each other in panic. Sefu moved. Instinct overruled strategy. He dropped the broom and took 2 strides forward. Then he forced himself to stop. One more step and everything might shatter too early. His heart hammered with such violence he could hear the blood in his ears. He had negotiated with ministers, stared down hostile boards, buried competitors, and survived markets collapsing under him. Nothing had prepared him for the sight of his own son using hired force to crush a man defending a woman and child. Baraka struggled up on one elbow, coughing. Quito looked down at him as if examining waste. "Throw him away from the entrance," he said. It was almost the exact phrasing from the night before. One of the guards grabbed Baraka by the arm. And then Tao arrived. He had come on foot from the parking structure, jacket slung over one shoulder, sunglasses in hand, clearly unprepared for the scene in front of him. He stopped so abruptly a folder under his arm slipped and papers spilled across the pavement. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Quito did not even turn fully. "Facilities issue." Tao stared at the crying child, the scattered peanuts, the repairman on his knees in the gutter, and Baraka half dragged by the guard. "That's not a facilities issue," Tao said. For one suspended second, hope flared in Sefu's chest. Here it is, he thought. Here is the moment. Tao stepped closer. His jaw was tight. His eyes flicked from Baraka to Quito, then to the staff watching behind the glass. Something human and urgent rose in his face. "Let him go," Tao said. Quito turned slowly now, irritation sharpening into warning. "Don't embarrass yourself." He didn't do anything. He obstructed security. He was helping a mother pick up food. Quito's voice dropped. "And you are making this public. That did it." Sefu saw the shift in Tao at once, not his conscience collapsing his courage. He glanced toward the glass doors again, toward the employees, toward the possibility of becoming a spectacle in front of his brother, in front of the company, in front of a world that already thought him weak. The right instinct was still there, but it was fighting a lifetime of fear, ridicule, and rivalry. "Just let the woman go," Tao muttered less forcefully now. Quito gave a small, contemptuous smile. "Go upstairs." Tao's nostrils flared. He looked at Baraka one last time. Then he bent, snatched up his fallen papers, and walked inside. Just like that. The hope in Sefu's chest did not break dramatically. It drained. Quietly, like water disappearing into cracked ground. Baraka saw it too. Not Sefu's hope, but Tao's retreat. A flicker of disappointment crossed his bruised face before the guard yanked him fully upright. "Enough," Quito said. "Remove them all." The vendors were driven back beyond the side street. The repairman lost half his tools to the gutter. The peanut seller gathered what little remained, tears streaking down her face, while still trying to soothe the baby. Baraka was shoved hard enough to stumble, but he stayed on his feet. He lifted his head once and his eyes met Sefu's. There was pain there. Anger, too. But most of all, there was recognition. Not of identity. Of silence. Baraka had seen Sefu step forward. Seen him stop. Seen him choose concealment over rescue. That look cut deeper than Quito's cruelty ever could. By 9 o'clock, the frontage was clean. Humiliation always made spaces look tidy. A luxury convoy rolled up minutes later. Men in tailored suits emerged smiling, praising the elegance of the building, the efficiency of the security arrangement, the modern image of the district. Quito received them with polished confidence. Through the revolving doors, Sefu caught a glimpse of Tao standing stiffly near the reception desk, face pale, saying nothing. Jelani arrived just in time to absorb the atmosphere and understand everything without asking. He took one glance at the empty curb, the shaken vendors down the block, Quito greeting investors, and Sefu standing with a broom beside the shining steps. Then Jelani smiled. Not because he approved, not because he disapproved, because he understood the usefulness of what had just happened. That expression chilled Sefu more than violence. As the delegation disappeared into the tower, Sefu picked up his broom with slow hands. The wood felt heavier now, or perhaps it was simply shame. He had come into the streets to test his sons. But the morning had tested him too, and he had failed the same way powerful men always failed first, by telling himself he needed more time before doing what was right. By noon, Sefu had made a decision. Watching was no longer enough. The next phase would not be observation, It would be judgment. The city gave Sefu no time to recover from shame. By late afternoon, Nairobi had become a furnace of glass engine heat and impatience. Dust rose from construction lots in pale clouds. Street vendors called out over traffic. Office towers threw long shadows across pavements where men sold tea from kettles blackened by years of charcoal fires. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and kept wailing, as if the city itself had grown tired of asking for mercy politely. Sefu stood beneath a faded bus stop sign 2 blocks from Mwangi Holdings and watched people move around him like water around stone. He had spent the morning replaying what happened outside the company gates. Kito's contempt, Tao's hesitation, Baraka's eyes. Most of all, Baraka's eyes. Sefu had seen accusation in them. Yes, but something worse too. Familiarity. The quiet recognition one wounded man gives another when he witnesses cowardice disguised as restraint. It unsettled him because it was true. He had hidden behind strategy while another man took the blow. He had told himself he needed a bigger revelation, a cleaner moment, a more useful test. That was how moral rot always defended itself. With timing, with justification, with the promise of action later. No more, he thought. If he was going to understand what remained of his son's character, he needed clearer proof. Not impressions, not polished language, not family dinners where everyone wore the same masks they had been wearing for years. He needed temptation. He needed choice. And choice, he knew, revealed more than speeches ever could. By 5:30, Mama Zawadi had arranged everything. It was simple. That was why it would work. 3 identical leather wallets, each worn just enough to look real, each containing different amounts of cash, a photocopied identity card, under a false name and a folded slip of paper suggesting the owner might have access to something valuable, a private storage locker, a security code, a land certificate, depending on which son found it. Not enough to be absurd, just enough to provoke greed, curiosity, or conscience. Sefu would let each wallet fall in a different place, near Kito's preferred entrance to the executive parking garage, outside the private members' lounge where Jelani met investors and lawyers, at a side street cafe where Tao often escaped when he wanted to avoid being seen inside the office. The 4th and final wallet, the plainest one he would carry with him later. That one was for Baraka. Not to trap him, Sefu realized. By now he already suspected the result. Maybe it was for himself. Maybe he still needed to see one honest act in full daylight before he lost all belief in what could be redeemed. At 6:10, Kito emerged from the garage ramp, alone, phone to his ear, stride clipped and purposeful. Sefu bent under his municipal jacket and, pushing a handcart of refuse bags, crossed the pavement just ahead of him. Perfect timing. He let the first wallet slip from beneath a torn ledger on the cart. It dropped near the curb with a soft slap. Sefu kept moving without looking back. 3 steps later, he heard Kito stop. Silence. Then the scrape of an expensive shoe against concrete. Sefu continued to the corner and lowered himself beside a public trash bin, head bowed as if sorting recyclables. From there, through the reflection in a dark shop window, he watched. Kito bent, picked up the wallet, and opened it immediately. No hesitation. His thumb moved through the cash first. Not the ID, not any sign of the owner. The money. He glanced around once, not with concern for the victim, but with calculation. Who had seen who mattered? His face remained cool, but Sefu knew that expression. It was the look Kito wore in negotiations when deciding whether an opportunity was worth the risk of being caught, wanting it. Kito removed the folded slip. Read it. His eyes narrowed. Then he did something that made Sefu's stomach turn. He slipped the cash into his inner jacket pocket and handed the emptied wallet to the security man at the garage gate. Found this near the curb, Kito said casually. Dispose of it or file it, whichever is protocol. The guard nodded with grateful obedience. Quito walked away without breaking stride. No guilt, no pause, not even enough respect for theft to call it by another name. Sefu stared at the pavement long after his son disappeared into traffic. His chest did not ache the way it had after the confrontation with Baraka. This felt colder, cleaner, a document stamped and filed, a fact. When temptation arrived in secret, Quito stole. At 7, the sky softened into evening purple. Outside the private lounge across from a boutique hotel, polished cars lined the curb, while drivers waited beneath jacaranda trees, shedding violet petals onto the hoods. Jelani liked this place because it looked informal while remaining exclusive. It suggested accessibility without surrendering rank. Sefu positioned himself near a planter broom in hand as 2 suited men held the door open for Jelani. Again he passed, just close enough. Again the wallet fell. Jelani noticed it at once, but unlike his brother, he did not pounce. He first looked at Sefu's retreating back, then at the doorway, then at the wallet. He crouched, lifted it, weighed it in his hand, and smiled faintly as though amused by the world for offering him yet another puzzle designed for smaller minds. He stepped aside beneath the light spilling from the hotel facade and opened it. He did not touch the cash right away. He examined the ID, then the folded paper. This one mentioned a storage locker in Westlands and a code that looked unfinished, just enough to imply hidden property. Jelani's expression sharpened not with greed exactly, but with interest. Opportunity interested him more than possession. Ownership was only one form of leverage. A woman from the lounge called his name. Jelani looked up and slid the wallet into his pocket. When she approached, he held up one finger apologetically, already dialing his phone. "Yes," he said, voice smooth. "I need you to check whether there's a registered locker tied to this name. No, don't log it yet. Just verify ownership and whether anything has been moved recently." He listened for a moment, gaze fixed on the street. "If it's nothing, we return it," he said lightly. "If it's something, we decide how public honesty needs to be." Then he smiled at the woman and ushered her inside. Sefu stood utterly still. That was Jelani's genius. He could dress theft in process. He could make exploitation sound responsible. He did not seize. He optimized. No wonder the family trusted him longest. He sinned in the language of caution. By the time darkness settled fully, Sefu was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with age or disguise. 2 sons tested, 2 sons exposed. Not dramatically, not in flames, in details, in reflexes, in the tiny private decisions men made when they believed no one important was watching. Now, Tao. The side street cafe sat behind a fuel station, the kind of place young executives pretended to discover on their own. Plastic chairs, harsh white bulbs, strong coffee, loud football commentary on a wall-mounted television. Tao came there when he wanted distance from his brothers and from the suffocating dignity of the tower. At 8:15, Tao arrived exactly as Mama Zawadi predicted. Tie-loosened sleeves rolled, expression rough, with a day gone badly. Sefu was seated on the curb a short distance away, eating from a paper packet of chips gone cold. As Tao passed, he let the 3rd wallet slip from his lap. Tao walked 3 steps before stopping. He turned. Saw the wallet. Saw Sefu. For a second, Sefu thought the test might be ruined. Tao had already noticed him once before. There was a chance something in him would connect the strange old cleaner to too many repeated coincidences. But Tao's face only showed fatigue. He bent, picked up the wallet, and opened it. His eyes widened slightly at the money. Then he saw the ID. Then the folded note. This one referenced a land certificate. Tao exhaled through his nose and looked around the nearly empty street. Sefu waited. Tao looked at the cash again. Then, in a move that surprised Sefu, he walked straight to the cafe counter. Anyone lose a wallet? He asked. The cashier shook her head. Tao held it up. ID says Gideon Olu. I'll leave my number. If someone asks, call me. He took out a pen, wrote on a napkin, and placed it beside the till. Not perfect honesty, Sefu thought. He had still opened it, still checked what might be inside, still been tempted. But he had not taken. He had not hidden. He had chosen the path that returned rather than consumed. As Tao walked away from the counter, he noticed Seifu watching him. What Tao muttered, embarrassed. Seifu lowered his gaze and rasped in a poorer man's voice. Not many return such things. Tao shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, well, doesn't make me a saint. No, Seifu said softly. It doesn't. Tao frowned, as if the answer unsettled him more than praise would have. He bought coffee, drank half of it standing up, then left without reclaiming the napkin. Seifu remained seated a while longer, letting the result settle. Quito stole openly. Jelani investigated greedily. Tao hesitated, but returned. 3 brothers, 3 moral temperatures. And now there was one final test, left the simplest one. Near 10 o'clock, Seifu found Baraka beneath the railway overpass, where a cluster of unhoused men and women were settling for the night around a metal drum fire. He approached slowly the plain 4th wallet tucked inside his jacket. Baraka looked up from where he was helping an older man wrap a bandage around an infected ankle. You again, he said. Seems so. Seifu sat on an overturned crate nearby. After a few minutes of silence, he stood to leave and let the wallet fall beside the crate. He had barely taken 2 steps before Baraka called out. Old man. Seifu turned. Baraka held up the wallet between 2 fingers. If this is your way of donating, it's clumsy. Seifu said nothing. Baraka crossed the short distance and placed it firmly into his hand. Check it. Seifu opened it. The cash remained untouched. The ID and folded paper were exactly where they had been. You didn't even look, Seifu asked. Baraka gave him a tired stare. I looked enough to know it was yours. There's money in here. There is money in banks too. None of it belongs to me. What if you needed it? Baraka glanced toward the old man by the fire, then at the sleeping forms already curled against the concrete wall. Need is not a knife that cuts law in half. If I become a thief every time life is hard, then the men who framed me won twice. The words entered Seifu like a blade, not because they were dramatic, because they were clean. Because in a city where wealth had taught his sons to justify every appetite, a homeless man had drawn the line with no witnesses, no audience, and no reward. Seifu closed the wallet slowly. Tonight had given him what he asked for. Proof. And proof, he was learning, came with a cost. Once seen, it could not be unseen. Once a man knew the truth of those meant to inherit his name, he could no longer hide inside optimism. As the drum fire crackled and shadows shifted against the concrete pillars, Seifu looked at Baraka's worn face, glowing briefly in orange light. For the first time since beginning this disguise, he understood something that terrified and steadied him at once. The future of his empire might not depend on which son was strongest. It might depend on whether he had the courage to trust the one man his empire had already destroyed. The file was waiting for him before dawn. Mama Zawadi had hidden it inside a torn sack of municipal gloves in the supply shed behind a public toilet block 3 streets from headquarters. No message, no explanation. Just the file, thick, brittle at the edges, bound with a fading red string that looked as though it had once held something official together, and then failed slowly over time. Seifu found it while the city was still half asleep. The sky above Nairobi was a bruised grey blue. Roosters called from somewhere behind concrete walls. A mosque loudspeaker carried the first prayer across rooftops, wet with mist. Minibuses had not yet begun their daily screaming. For a few rare minutes, the city felt undecided about what kind of day it would become. Seifu stood alone in the shed municipal cap pushed back, hands shaking before he even untied the string. He had spent the entire night replaying Baraka's words. If I become a thief every time life is hard, then the men who framed me won twice. Framed. Not defeated, not unfortunate, not merely ruined by fate. Framed. There was intention in that word. Design. People. Signatures. Decisions made in offices by men with polished shoes and clean fingernails. Men who never saw the prisons they built because they called them process. Seifu opened the file. The first pages were exactly what he feared. Project summaries. Land acquisition maps, cost breakdowns, contractor schedules, internal memos from a housing and logistics development 15 years earlier on the eastern edge of the city. The project name hit him like a physical blow. Makutano Corridor Renewal Initiative. He remembered it instantly. It had been one of the projects that pushed Mwangi Holdings out of national prominence and into regional power. The one journalists praised as visionary urban modernization. The one ministers cited in speeches about progress. The one international lenders used as proof that public-private partnership could unlock dormant value in neglected land, dormant value. Seifu stared at the phrase printed beneath the original concept memo and felt something close to nausea rise into his throat. That dormant value had been neighborhoods, kiosks, workshops, families, lives compressed into boxes on a map until displacement looked clean enough to approve. He turned the page. There were compensation tables, then revised compensation tables, then handwritten annotations questioning discrepancies in relocation figures, drainage allocations, safety compliance, and materials procurement. Some notes were in blue ink, some black ones set in green. The green caught his attention because the handwriting was neat, technical, almost painfully careful. At the bottom of one inspection report was a signature Baraka Ndlovu. Site oversight engineer Seifu froze. For several seconds he could not move. Not because he was surprised anymore, some part of him had already known, but because the proof made it real in a new, unforgiving way. Baraka had not merely been near the machine that destroyed him. He had been inside it. One of the people trying perhaps desperately to stop it from becoming what it became. Seifu read faster. A memo from Baraka to project compliance, a flagged discrepancy in household relocation allowances, a request for an audit on subcontractor invoices, a complaint that demolition notices were being issued before final compensation confirmation, a warning that current execution exposes the company to material, legal, and moral liability. Moral liability. The phrase sat on the page like a voice from the dead. There were no responses attached, only the next cluster of documents. An internal disciplinary notice accusing Baraka of unauthorized access to restricted financial records, a procurement complaint alleging fund diversion, a recommendation for suspension. Then swiftly, almost beautifully, in the terrifying way bureaucracies can turn murder into paperwork, a criminal referral. Seifu leaned against the supply shelf because his knees had gone weak. This was not an accident, not a misunderstanding, not a young employee crushed by an indifferent system. Baraka had been identified as a threat and processed out of existence with methodical efficiency. And then Seifu found the page that broke him. It was an executive authorization sheet for accelerated project continuation despite operational disruptions. 5 signatures sat at the bottom. 1 belonged to a deputy minister, 1 to legal counsel, 1 to the COO at the time, 1 to a project director Seifu vaguely remembered firing years later for unrelated corruption. And the last signature was his. Seifu Mwangi, his real hand, his real stroke. Firm, confident, impatient. Signed the way powerful men sign when they trust summaries more than consequences. He closed his eyes. The shed seemed to shrink around him. The smell of bleach-damp cardboard and rusted metal grew suddenly suffocating. Somewhere outside, a truck reversed with a shrill mechanical beep. Life was beginning. Workers would soon arrive. The city would rise. Traffic would surge. Coffee would pour. Meetings would begin. And none of it would care that 15 years earlier, a man had signed his name and helped bury another man alive. Sefu opened the file again because he deserved the pain. Near the back, behind legal correspondence and press talking points, Mama Zawadi had inserted newer documents, copies of prison release records, failed appeals, and a private investigator's notes from years ago that had apparently never reached Sefu. Someone had tried to find Baraka after the scandal cooled, or perhaps to make sure he stayed broken. The notes were incomplete, but they told enough. After prison, Baraka returned to his former neighborhood and found their house repossessed. His wife Lindiwe had moved inland with their son Kamo to stay with relatives. Baraka searched for them for months. Odd jobs, church shelters, records offices, clinics. One note clipped from the rural health center in Kwiri contained a single devastating line: child deceased following untreated respiratory complications. Mother deceased 6 months later. Sefu stopped reading. He pressed a hand to his mouth and made a sound he had not made since he buried his wife. It was not a cry exactly. It was the body rejecting the weight of truth too large to hold in silence. Kamo. Lindiwe. Gone. Not by lightning, not by war, not by some random cruelty of the earth, by a chain. A project approval, a false accusation, a prison sentence, poverty, delay, illness, absence, death. No single document said Sefu Mwangi killed them. That was what made systems so seductive. Guilt diffused itself until no one felt fully responsible, even while lives were crushed under the total weight of everyone's convenience. Sefu sank onto an overturned bucket in the narrow shed and stared at the file in his lap. Memory came for him with vicious clarity now. He remembered the year of Makutano. He had been expanding aggressively. Investors were nervous, ministers impatient, competitors circling. His wife had already been sick by then, though they were still pretending otherwise. Every day had brought 10 urgent decisions, and he had worn busyness like a crown. His executives summarized, he approved. His legal teams filtered risk. He trusted them. His project chiefs promised the community disruptions were manageable. He told himself scale required delegation. Scale required blindness, it turned out. A soft knock on the metal frame startled him. Mama Zawadi stood in the doorway, wrapped in a dark shawl, despite the morning warmth. She did not ask whether he had seen enough. One look at his face told her. "You knew," he said hoarsely. She stepped inside and closed the door halfway behind her. Not all of it at first. How long? She took a breath. I suspected the old project file had been buried improperly years ago. I only confirmed Baraka's identity 2 nights ago after you described his comments, and I reopened archived personnel records. Sefu looked back down at the page bearing his signature. You should have brought this to me then. I tried, she said softly. He lifted his head. Her expression did not change, but there was old hurt in it. Not fresh anger, something older, more tired. 15 years ago, she said I told you the compliance team was requesting direct review of displacement grievances. You said legal would handle it because you were flying to Kigali in an hour and your wife had just started her next treatment cycle. You were drowning, Sefu. I knew that. She paused. But drowning men still leave footprints when they step on people. The words did not feel cruel. They felt deserved. He looked away. I found later evidence that some records had been altered after your sign-off, she continued. By then the project had been politically shielded. The press had moved on, and anyone who pushed too hard was told they were attacking growth. I kept copies of what I could. She nodded toward the file. This is what survived. Sefu's voice was barely audible. Baraka shared his bread with me. Mama Zawadi closed her eyes for a moment. That makes it worse, he said. Yes. No comfort, no false absolution. Just yes. Outside, the first sanitation workers began arriving, their boots crunching over gravel. Someone laughed. Someone cursed at a broken tap. The world kept moving with offensive normalcy. Sefu rose slowly from the bucket file in hand. He doesn't know, he said. Not yet. He knows the company destroyed him. Yes, he doesn't know I signed the continuation order. Mama Zawadi held his gaze. Do you want him not to know? The question landed like judgment. Sefu thought of Baraka under the awning. Baraka by the fire. Baraka standing in front of a frightened mother and a screaming child while wealth ordered him beaten. He thought of all the ways powerful men managed truth when it threatened them: partial confession, strategic regret, charitable compensation, quiet settlements, memorial language without accountability. He felt suddenly sick at the thought of becoming one more man who apologized only as much as necessary to preserve the architecture of his life. No, he said. The word surprised him with its own steadiness. Mama Zawadi studied him for a long moment. Then understand this before you keep going. When you reveal the truth, you may not only lose your sons. You may lose your right to think of yourself as the victim of their corruption. Sefu nodded once. He already had. He tucked the file beneath his jacket, beneath the costume of a municipal cleaner, beneath the bent back and fake beard. For the first time since he began this test, he understood that the disguise was no longer protecting him from his sons. It was protecting him from the full sight of the man he had been. As he stepped back into the cold morning light, one truth burned brighter than all the others. Baraka was not merely the measure by which his sons had failed. He was the measure by which Sefu himself would now be judged. By the time the sun climbed above the towers, Sefu had stopped thinking like a father and started thinking like a man preparing for a controlled collapse. That frightened him more than the file had. For years he had survived by mastering disaster before it became visible. A failing project was restructured. A corrupt executive was quietly replaced. A scandal was diluted into procedure. Even grief after his wife died had been filed into productivity. He had mistaken containment for strength so often that it now came to him instinctively. But this was different. This time the disaster wore his bloodline. Mwangi Holdings moved through the morning as if nothing had changed. Reception screens glowed with stock numbers. Elevators whispered up and down polished shafts. Executives crossed marble floors holding tablets and coffee like sacred tools. Outside, sweepers dragged leaves and wrappers into careful piles. Inside, profit continued its elegant march. Sefu, disguised and silent, watched from the edge of the loading bay, while Mama Zawadi's latest notes sat folded in his sock like a second pulse. She had not written much. She did not need to. Jelani met with family council at 6:40 a.m. Off-site. Requested trust amendment draft. Secondary meeting scheduled with Dr. Kamunde, neurological specialist, 11:15 a.m. Phrase overheard from legal assistant capacity declaration protocol. Sefu read the lines twice and felt the temperature inside him drop. Capacity declaration. It was clever. Cleaner than poisoning. Cleaner than public rebellion. If Jelani could seed doubt about his father's mental competence, then the succession structures could be activated for stability. Investors would praise prudence. The board would call it regrettable but necessary. Keto would rage too early and too publicly, making himself look unfit. Tao would be sidelined as immature. and Jelani, calm and concerned, would step into the gap with the velvet knife he had always hidden inside his smile. The brilliance of the scheme was not that it was ruthless. It was that it could be made to look compassionate. At 10:30, Mama Zawadi slipped into the service corridor where Sefu was sorting cleaning supplies purely for appearance. She did not greet him. She simply placed a maintenance order pad on the shelf beside him and began speaking under her breath as if reading inventory. "The lawyer is named Isaac Mureithi," she said. "He has worked with the family trust for 9 years, loyal to whoever seems most likely to remain powerful." Sefu kept his eyes on the mop bucket. "And the doctor real, respected. No evidence he knows he's being used yet." Yet. She nodded faintly. Jelani requested a private consult on observed behavioral decline in an aging executive under stress. No patient present, just hypotheticals. Sefu almost laughed. Hypotheticals. Another beautiful word with blood beneath it. What else? This time, Mama Zawadi hesitated. That project file wasn't the only thing buried. She slid a carbon copy sheet toward him. "I pulled restricted access logs from archives last night. 6 years ago, someone reopened the Makutano legal closure package, not to investigate. To seal it tighter." Sefu glanced down. A user authorization code, a timestamp, a departmental clearance signature. The name attached made his jaw lock. Jelani Mwangi. It was there in black and white. Not theory, not instinct, not the fatherly tendency to see monsters in one son after disappointment with another. Fact. Jelani had gone into the grave after the dirt had settled and pressed it down harder. Why, Sefu asked quietly. Mama Zawadi's face remained unreadable. Because he understood before anyone else what that file could do to the family name. Or to his own path toward power, Sefu thought. At 11:15, Sefu positioned himself near the side entrance of an upscale medical building across town. A street cleaner attracted little notice there. Wealth learned early not to see the workers who erased traces of its passing. Jelani arrived alone. He wore a pale linen jacket, now less formal than office attire, as though he wanted this meeting to feel almost intimate. He entered the building with the same composed ease he brought everywhere, a man never chased by consequence because he had spent his life walking half a step ahead of it. Sefu waited outside for 40 minutes under a jacaranda tree, shedding purple petals onto the curb. When Jelani emerged, he was not smiling. He was thoughtful. That was worse. He stood beside his car, making a call. Sefu angled closer, head down, pushing his broom in slow arcs through petals and dust. "No, not yet," Jelani said quietly. "I'm saying there are warning indicators. Irritability, secrecy, disorganized absence, erratic decision cycles." A pause. "No, Isaac, I understand. It's delicate. That's why we need language, not accusations." Another pause. Then Jelani said the sentence that stripped away the last layer of doubt. "If father disappears for even 48 hours without board visibility, the emergency review clause becomes easier to trigger." Sefu's hands went still on the broom. "Disappears. Not if his health worsens. Not if he needs rest. If father disappears." The phrase throbbed with intent. Jelani ended the call, slid into his car, and drove away. For a few seconds, Sefu remained under the falling jacaranda blossoms like a man turned to stone. The city moved around him in bursts of motion, boda-bodas buzzing past a delivery van, reversing nurses in blue scrubs crossing the road with lunch packets in hand. None of it reached him. He had been betrayed before. By partners, ministers, friendly enemies, even by his own ambition. But there was a particular coldness in discovering that one's son had not merely become unworthy of power. He had become willing to manufacture the father's collapse as a pathway into it. That evening, Sefu did something he had not planned. He followed Quito, not because Quito was innocent, far from it, but because he needed to know how deep the rot spread between the brothers. Whether they were rivals in the ordinary way wealth made siblings monstrous, or whether one of them had already crossed into open conspiracy. Quito met someone at a private whiskey bar on the 12th floor of a hotel overlooking Uhuru Highway. Through a service corridor and a half-open partition, Sefu caught enough of the conversation to understand the shape of it. Quito was angry, loudly, stupidly angry. "She's feeding him documents," he hissed. "I know she is." The man across from him, a private security consultant. Sefu, vaguely recognized, lifted a calming hand. "Speculation is not evidence." "Quito is not stupid," Quito snapped, referring to himself in the third person, the way he did when enraged. "Zawadi is moving differently, legal is moving differently, and Jelani is too calm." At that, Sefu stilled. So Quito knew. Not everything, but enough to sense the board was becoming a battleground, and that Jelani was maneuvering beneath the table instead of pounding on top of it. "Do you have proof he's acting against you?" the consultant asked. "Against me?" Quito laughed bitterly. "He's acting against all of us. That snake wants father declared unfit. Once that happens, he'll play grieving son while he empties the house." The consultant leaned back. "Then expose him." With what suspicion Quito slammed his glass down. He never gets his hands dirty. That was almost true, Sefu thought from the shadows. Almost. Quito lowered his voice. "Listen to me carefully. If he moves first, I will not be pushed aside politely. Do you understand?" The consultant did not answer immediately. That silence told Sefu more than words would have. Men left pauses like that when money had already been discussed. He slipped away before hearing the rest. So now the shape of the house was clear. Quito brute force wrapped in entitlement. Jelani surgical ambition wrapped in manners. Tao still drifting between shame and awakening. And underneath it all, old buried crimes like roots twisting up through polished stone. Near midnight, in the small rented room where he now slept, Sefu spread the evidence across the bed in careful rows. Archive access logs with Jelani's code, trust amendment requests, notes about capacity review protocol, the old Makutano file, his own signature, his own guilt. Rain began again outside, tapping softly at first, then harder. He sat on the edge of the mattress and tried to picture the next family dinner if he simply walked back in as Sefu Mwangi billionaire father and demanded explanations. He knew exactly what would happen. Quito would explode. Jelani would deny with grace. Tao would freeze. Lawyers would intervene. Truth would become noise. Everyone would protect position before soul. No. The reckoning needed a stage large enough that masks could not survive it. A boardroom, witnesses, records, the living victim, the living sons, the living father stripped of disguise and defense alike. Only then would the truth have enough light. He was still thinking this when there came a soft knock at the door. Mama Zawadi entered without waiting. Her face, usually so controlled, carried something close to urgency. "It's happening faster than we thought," she said. Sefu stood. What now? She handed him a printed email chain. At the top, in legal language dressed as concern, was a request for an emergency succession preparedness meeting in 48 hours. Jelani had not signed it directly. Of course not. It came through counsel framed as fiduciary duty in response to recent irregular executive behavior and concerning absence patterns. Irregular absence patterns. Sefu almost smiled at the elegance of it. The disguise itself, his test, his disappearance into the streets, was being weaponized against him. "He's using your own absence," Mama Zawadi said, confirming the thought. "Another day or two, and he'll have enough procedural cover to force a review." Sefu folded the paper slowly. "Good," he said. For the first time all day, Mama Zawadi looked surprised. He lifted his eyes to hers, and something in his expression must have changed, because she said nothing more. Yolani thought he was building a case. Quito thought he was preparing for war. Neither of them understood what was coming, because in 48 hours, if Seifu could bear the full cost of truth, they would not be fighting over an inheritance anymore. They would be standing in a room where every lie in the family would finally be forced to choose between daylight and death. The city felt different when a deadline was tied to blood. For the next 2 days, Nairobi moved under a sky of thin heat and gathering tension, and Seifu moved through it like a ghost carrying his own indictment. Every street seemed sharper. Every sound carried farther. Construction hammers, matatu horns, vendors arguing over change, the scrape of plastic chairs on pavement outside tea stalls. Somewhere behind all of it, time was narrowing toward the meeting Jelani had set in motion. 48 hours. That was how long a son had given himself to rearrange a father's life. Seifu spent the first morning in disguise outside the community annex building owned by the Mwangi Foundation, a dull, concrete structure 3 neighborhoods away from the gleaming tower where the family liked to be photographed. This was where scholarship files were processed, where emergency food vouchers were issued, where women waited in slow-moving lines for sanitation grants and school support. It was not glamorous work, which was exactly why no one in the family paid much attention to it, except Mama Zawadi. And now, unexpectedly, Tao. At 9:15, Tao walked through the annex gate with none of his usual careless swagger. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled, no tie, no watch that screamed money. For a moment, Seifu thought he might have come by accident, perhaps sent on some minor public relations errand. But then he saw Mama Zawadi meet him at the side entrance, hand him a stack of folders, and speak with unusual seriousness. Tao listened. That alone was new. He did not interrupt. He did not smirk. He did not look over his shoulder for escape. He simply listened jaw tight as Mama Zawadi pointed toward 3 things in turn: the waiting area full of tired mothers, the cramped records office, and the battered van where outreach supplies were being loaded for the informal settlements on the edge of the city. Seifu stood across the road beside a municipal waste cart head bent and watched his youngest son step into a world the family name had always preferred to encounter through reports. Tao began badly. He was too fast with his hands, too unsure with the paperwork, too visibly uncomfortable, when an older woman snapped at him for placing her file in the wrong stack. He apologized awkwardly. A teenage clerk tried not to laugh. A little girl with tightly braided hair stared at him while licking sugar from a fried dough stick, clearly trying to decide whether rich men came in unfinished versions too. Twice Tao reached instinctively for his phone, as if to escape the room by disappearing into the glow of a screen. Twice he stopped himself. By noon he was sweating through his shirt. By 1 the van returned from its first route, carrying a boy of perhaps 10 years old, with a cut above his eyebrow and a grandmother furious enough for 3 people. The child had been struck by a loose metal panel near an abandoned kiosk in a settlement corridor where drainage repairs had stalled. Tao happened to be nearest when they brought him in. "What happened?" he asked. "What always happens," the grandmother snapped. "Things break where poor people live, and no one fixes them until blood is visible." The sentence hit Seifu hard even from across the room. Tao looked at the boy, at the bleeding cut, at the swollen, dirty fingers clutching a crushed school notebook. Something in him changed then, not all at once, not dramatically, but enough for his posture to shift from embarrassed guest to present human being. "Get the nurse," he said to the clerk. "She's at lunch." "Then call her back." "We can't always—" "I said call her back." The authority in his voice startled everyone, including himself. The clerk obeyed. Tao crouched to the boy's height, took a clean cloth from the desk, and pressed it gently to the cut. "What's your name, Omari?" the boy muttered. "Does it hurt?" Omari gave him a look of deep insult. "Obviously." A few people nearby laughed despite themselves. Even the grandmother's anger bent slightly around the edges. Tao almost smiled. Fair enough. Sefu watched from the doorway, not breathing fully. He had seen his sons command boardrooms, manipulate aides, threaten vendors, and dress greed in polished language. He had not seen one of them kneel on a cracked tile floor and hold pressure on a stranger's wound without checking who might be watching. But then Tao looked up. His eyes met Sefu's for the briefest second through the glass pane of the annex entrance. Recognition did not flare, not fully, but unease did. Tao frowned, as if that bent old municipal worker had begun appearing too often at the edges of his conscience. Sefu moved away before the look could sharpen. That evening, Mama Zawadi found him behind the records shed. He stayed 6 hours, she said quietly. Longer than I expected. Sefu kept his face turned toward the alley. Why did you bring him there? I didn't. He came to me. That made him turn. Mama Zawadi crossed her arms. He found one of Jelani's discarded draft memos in the upstairs printer room yesterday. He couldn't understand the full legal wording, but he understood enough to know his brother was preparing something around your absence and capacity concerns. He came to ask whether it was real. And you told him, I told him the family was standing on rotten boards, and that if he wanted truth, he would need to be strong enough to hear it. She held Sefu's gaze. Then I sent him to work. Not to speak, not to guess. To work. A lesson Sefu realized he should have taught all his sons years ago. What does he know now? Sefu asked. Not everything, but enough to be ashamed. Later that night, Tao learned more. It happened in the underground parking level of Mwangi Holdings, where polished concrete amplified every word spoken too loudly. Tao had come back to the tower to collect a laptop charger, and perhaps Sefu suspected to avoid being alone with his thoughts. Sefu was there too, disguised as part of the night sanitation team, pushing a wheeled bin past the loading dock, when Jelani's voice drifted from behind a pillar. Smooth, low, controlled. Tao answered, and for once there was steel in it. You're trying to have him declared unfit. A pause. Then Jelani. You should be careful with accusations you don't understand. I understand enough. Know you understand emotion, not governance. Tao laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Governance, is that what you call it when you set traps for your own father? Jelani stepped into partial view, one hand in his pocket. Expression composed in that infuriating way of his. I call it risk management. Father has been absent, secretive and unstable. Investors are nervous. Legal exposure is growing. Someone has to think like an adult. Tao moved closer. You mean someone has to think like a vulture? Jelani did not flinch. And you mean someone has to keep pretending innocence is a strategy? The air between them tightened. From behind the loading bay shadows, Sefu watched his youngest son struggle against years of being made smaller. Tao jabbed a finger toward his brother's chest. I found your draft memo. I saw the words. Observed decline. Protective intervention. You're writing him into a grave while he's still alive. Jelani's face cooled another degree. Watch your voice. Or what? Or you'll force me to remind everyone why no one serious ever considered you a successor. There it was. The old family knife. Shame sharpened into hierarchy. Tao took the hit visibly, his shoulders locked. His mouth tightened. For one dangerous second, Sefu thought he might swing at Jelani and lose everything to rage. But instead, Tao said through clenched teeth, Maybe that's because everyone in this family mistakes cruelty for competence. Jelani's smile was small and poisonous. And maybe you mistake guilt for growth. That one landed, because it was partly true. Tao had changed, yes, but shame was driving him, and shame could still be manipulated. Jelani stepped closer and lowered his voice. Listen carefully. When father returns, and he will in some dramatic mood, no doubt he will need stability. Quito is too blunt. You are too soft. I am the only one preventing total collapse. If you want a place in what comes next, stand aside. Tao stared at him. Sefu could almost hear the war inside the boy, fear, resentment, longing to be seen, the old reflex to accept the role of lesser son if it meant escaping conflict. Then, unexpectedly, another voice cut in. Stand aside for what Baraka asked. Both brothers turned. He had emerged from the freight elevator corridor carrying a mop bucket and rag, having apparently been hired for temporary night cleaning through one of the subcontractors servicing the tower. His bruise had faded to yellow at the edges. His jacket was cleaner than usual, but no less worn. In this polished underground space, he looked like a truth the building had failed to exclude. Jelani's expression flashed with annoyance. This doesn't concern you. Baraka set down the bucket slowly. That depends. I've learned rich families often call something private when they mean dirty. Tao's eyes widened slightly, recognizing him from the gate confrontation. Jelani's voice sharpened. Leave. Baraka did not leave. Instead, he looked at Tao. This one speaks like a man standing at a door with fire behind him. Tao gave a humorless laugh. You have no idea. Baraka held his gaze. No. I have exactly enough idea. The question is whether you plan to keep being frightened of the wrong thing. Silence fell. Even Jelani seemed, for the first time in the entire exchange, uncertain how to proceed. Because contempt worked best on people who needed your approval. Baraka needed nothing from him. Tao swallowed. And what's the wrong thing? Baraka answered without hesitation. Not losing money, not losing a title, not losing face. The wrong thing is losing yourself so slowly you mistake surrender for peace. The words hung in the cold air of the parking level like a bell still ringing after impact. Sefu felt them too, perhaps more than either son. Jelani recovered first. Lovely speech, he said. Now get back to work. Baraka glanced at the mop bucket, then back at him. I am at work. He picked up the bucket and walked away. But something had shifted. Tao stood motionless for several seconds after Baraka disappeared around the service corner. Then he looked at Jelani with an expression Sefu had never seen on his face before. Not just anger, decision. You're not taking him down like this, Tao said. Jelani's eyes narrowed. Excuse me, I don't care if Quito burns the house, and I don't care if you think I'm weak. I'm done helping this family lie to itself. Tao took one step backward. Not retreating, but choosing distance. Whatever you're planning, I won't stand aside. Jelani's reply came cold and immediate. Then you will be crushed with the rest of the debris. Tao turned and walked away before the threat could hook into him. Sefu remained in shadow long after both sons had gone. The parking level smelled of oil bleach and old concrete. Somewhere overhead, elevators moved people toward dinner meetings and rooftop bars, and apartments high enough to forget the streets existed. But down here, beneath the polished life of the tower, Sefu finally allowed himself a dangerous thing. Hope. Small, wounded, late, but real. Because for the first time, Tao had not merely hesitated between conscience and fear. He had chosen. And in a family where power had always spoken loudest, that choice might yet become the one sound capable of breaking the lie open. The morning of the board meeting arrived dressed as a victory. The sky above Nairobi was a clean, expensive blue. Sunlight slid across the mirrored face of Mwangi Holdings until the tower looked less like a building and more like a monument to certainty. Black cars lined the curb. Security barriers had been polished. Floral arrangements stood in the lobby like curated innocence. Assistants moved quickly with tablets and coffee. Legal counsel arrived carrying folders slim enough to seem harmless. Investors smiled the smiles of people who believed they were coming to witness an orderly transfer of power. Jelani had designed it that way. Even the agenda was beautiful. Emergency Governance Stability Review. Executive Capacity Assessment Discussion. Interim Leadership Safeguards. No knives, no blood, no mention of a son arranging to bury his father while calling it prudence. Sefu watched the arrivals from across the street in the uniform of a municipal sweeper, his broom in one hand, the Makutano file strapped tight beneath his jacket. Beside him, under a faded bus shelter, stood Baraka in a clean but worn shirt Mama Zawadi had insisted he accept for the day. He had almost refused it. "I'm not dressing up so rich people can hear the truth more comfortably," he had said. Mama Zawadi had answered, "You're not dressing up for them. You're dressing so no one can dismiss you before you speak." Now Baraka stood with his shoulders slightly tense, staring at the tower that had once destroyed his life from a distance and would within the hour be forced to look him in the face. "You can still walk away," Sefu said quietly. Baraka did not look at him. "Can you?" Sefu had no answer. Behind them, Tao stepped out of an unmarked sedan and adjusted the collar of a simple dark suit. He was pale, sleepless, but steadier than Sefu had ever seen him. He joined them without greeting, eyes fixed on the entrance. "Quito is already upstairs," he said. "He brought 2 outside advisors, probably expecting war. Jelani has legal in the room and 1 independent director on his side." Mama Zawadi emerged last, carrying a leather portfolio, and the calm of a woman who had already accepted the cost of truth before anyone else had the courage to speak it. "Then let them begin," she said. At 9, exactly, the boardroom doors closed on the 32nd floor. Inside, air conditioning hummed softly over polished wood and controlled ambition. The long table gleamed. Water glasses were perfectly aligned. Screens at the far wall displayed the company crest and that poisonous phrase, Governance Stability Review. Quito sat at the left side of the table, shoulders rigid, fingers drumming once against a leather folder. He looked furious already, though he was trying to wear the anger like authority. Across from him, Jelani sat composed, one hand folded over the other, expression grave enough to suggest concern and noble reluctance. Several directors shifted in their seats. Outside counsel arranged notes. The chairperson, an elderly former banker named Peter Njorog, cleared his throat and opened the meeting. As everyone is aware, he began recent irregular executive absence and concerning communication patterns have prompted a request for emergency review under the governance continuity provisions of the Trust and Board Charter. Quito cut in immediately. "Say his name. Stop hiding behind stationery." Njoroge frowned. "This is not helpful." "No," Quito snapped. "What's not helpful is pretending we're here because anyone suddenly discovered a conscience." Jelani turned his head with measured disappointment. "If you intend to make this a spectacle, brother, at least wait until there's substance." Quito laughed harshly. "Substance? You mean the little story you've been building about father losing his mind?" A murmur moved around the table. Jelani did not flinch. "I requested a procedural review because our father has been absent, secretive, and operationally erratic at a time of heightened legal and market sensitivity. That is not betrayal. It is stewardship." The word hung in the room like perfume over smoke. Tao sat near the far end, silent, jaw tight. 2 days earlier, he might have folded under the atmosphere under the old family choreography of dominance and shame. Now he only watched. Jelani continued, voice calm, almost sorrowful. "None of us wants to discuss incapacity, but responsible governance exists precisely for moments when emotion cannot be allowed to override structure." Quito leaned forward. "You mean moments when you think you can steal the structure?" "Enough," Njoroge said sharply. "This is a board, not a market stall." A legal advisor spoke next, careful and bloodless. "To be clear, no determination is being made today." The purpose is to consider whether interim protective mechanisms should be activated, pending direct assessment of Mr. Mwangi's present executive condition. Protective mechanisms. Sefu, listening from the service corridor outside through the barely open side door Mama Zawadi had arranged, almost admired the elegance of the violence. Then came the moment he knew would reveal the final truth about his sons. Njoroge asked, "Has anyone had direct contact with Mr. Mwangi in the last 72 hours?" Silence. Kito looked irritated. Tao said nothing, and Jelani, with his face arranged into controlled concern, answered only indirectly. Which in itself, I think, should trouble every person in this room. Sefu closed his eyes briefly. There it was. The son's voice carrying not love, not fear, but the smooth precision of a man tightening the last wire around a trap. Njoroge nodded grimly. Then we proceed. A resolution packet was passed down the table. Tao did not touch his. Kito snatched his up and flipped through it with visible disgust. "What is this?" he barked. "Interim voting restrictions. Temporary signature limits. You wrote him out before he's even in the room." Jelani exhaled softly. "I wrote safeguards, because unlike you, I can think beyond my own appetite." Kito surged halfway to his feet. "Say that again." Tao rose too. "Sit down, both of you." It shocked the room. Even Kito paused long enough to stare at him. For years, Tao had been the one everyone spoke over, around, or through. The decorative son, the unfinished son, the one allowed at the table but never mistaken for part of its spine. Yet when he spoke again, his voice was steady. "We are not here because father is unstable," he said. "We're here because this family is." Jelani's eyes sharpened. "Be careful." "No," Tao said. "You be careful." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Jelani's face. Tao placed both palms on the table. "You drafted this before anyone had evidence. You met legal off-site. You met a neurologist without father present. You used his absence, an absence you didn't even try to explain honestly, as grounds to trigger a review. That is a serious allegation," counsel said. "It's a true one." Jelani spoke before anyone else could. "This is emotional theater. My brother is confused, manipulated, and in no position to interpret governance procedure." Tao laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "That's your favorite trick, isn't it? Turn every human thing into procedure until nobody remembers what's being done." Njoroge raised a hand. "Mr. Jelani Mwangi, did you or did you not request preliminary advisory language regarding executive capacity?" Jelani answered without hesitation. "Yes, because my father's conduct warranted prudence." "And did you access sealed archival records relating to Makutano 6 years ago?" Tao asked suddenly. This time the silence hit harder. Jelani turned slowly toward him. What Tao's voice did not rise. "You heard me." Kito frowned. What archival records? Tao looked at neither brother. The ones someone buried because they could destroy this family if exposed. That was the moment the room truly changed. No longer a governance review. No longer succession strategy. The air itself seemed to lean forward. Jelani's composure returned, but too deliberately. "You have no idea what you are saying." A voice came from the doorway. "He does." Every head turned. An elderly municipal sweeper stood just inside the boardroom entrance, one hand on a broom cap, low back bent. Several people reacted with pure irritation before recognition had time to catch up. "Who let him in?" one director snapped. The sweeper shut the door behind him. Then, with terrible calm, he set the broom aside. He removed the cap first, then the grey beard, then the silicone age pads from his cheeks. The room stopped breathing. Beneath the disguise stood Sefu Mwangi. Not on a screen, not by speakerphone, not as a rumor to be legally managed. In flesh, in silence. in judgment. Peter Njoroge's mouth fell open. One director actually stood up. Quito went rigid as stone. Tao closed his eyes briefly as if bracing for impact, even while relieved. And Jelani polished deliberate. Jelani lost control of his face for less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. Shock, calculation, fear. Sefu saw all three. No one sits, Sefu said. His voice was not loud yet. It froze the room more effectively than shouting could have. He walked to the head of the table carrying the thick file beneath his arm. He did not look at his sons at first. He looked at the directors, the lawyers, the investors' representatives who suddenly wished they were somewhere else. You gathered this meeting, he said, to discuss whether I remain fit to lead. No one answered. Very well, let us discuss fitness. He placed the Makutano file on the table with a sound louder than paper should make. Mwangi Holdings has many liabilities, he continued. Financial, legal, reputational. But today we will speak first about moral liability. Jelani found his voice. Father, with respect, this is neither the forum nor the method. Silence, it cut across the room like steel. Sefu turned to him then. You will have your chance to speak after you have listened to what you helped bury. Jelani's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. Sefu opened the file. 15 years ago, a project called the Makutano Corridor Renewal Initiative displaced families, falsified compensation flows, buried internal objections, and destroyed innocent lives. Some of you at this table signed its continuation. I was one of them. A stunned murmur. Quito looked from the file to his father, baffled. This was not the battle he had come prepared for. This was not about voting blocks or control clauses. This was something far more dangerous, truth that reached backward before inheritance and forward beyond it. Sefu continued, voice steady, though it cost him dearly. An engineer working on that project documented discrepancies and warned of legal and moral catastrophe. He was framed for theft, imprisoned. His family was destroyed. Records were sealed. Years later, someone within this company reopened that grave only to bury it deeper. His eyes moved to Jelani. At last, directly. You. Jelani stood abruptly. This is outrageous. Sit down. I will not sit here and be accused on the basis of your own archive access logs. Sefu lifted a document from the file. Of your private legal consultations, of your succession drafts prepared before any evidence of my incapacity existed, of the fact that while pretending concern for your father, you were already manipulating the board against him. The words struck like blows. Quito stared openly now, first at Jelani, then at the documents, then at the directors who had suddenly become very interested in paper. Tao said nothing, but Sefu saw his hands trembling at his sides. Sefu walked to the door and opened it. Mama Zawadi, he said. Bring him in. A second later, Baraka entered the room. No disguise, no performance. Just a man in a clean shirt, worn shoes, and a face history had tried to erase. Recognition did not come all at once for everyone. But for Sefu's sons, it came with brutal speed. Quito knew him from the gate. Tao knew him from the parking level. And Jelani, after one hard blink, understood exactly who was standing there and why the room had suddenly become a grave for every lie he had polished. This, Sefu said, voice roughening for the first time, is Baraka Ndlovu. Baraka stopped near the end of the table, eyes sweeping the boardroom with the strange calm of a man who had already survived the worst thing wealth could do to him. He is not a disruption, Sefu said. He is evidence. He is memory. He is the cost. Then he drew a slow breath and delivered the blow that shattered whatever remained of the morning's false order. The purpose of this meeting is no longer to determine whether I am fit to lead. The purpose is to determine whether this company, this family, and every man in this room can survive the full truth of what we have done. No one moved. No one even reached for water. Because at last the boardroom understood this was no governance review. This was a reckoning. No one in the boardroom moved for several long seconds. The silence was not empty. It was crowded with everything that had been too carefully hidden for too many years: ambition, fear, grief, complicity, inheritance, shame. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Nairobi shimmered beneath the late morning sun, indifferent and alive. Inside time seemed to have stepped back and folded its arms. Baraka stood at the far end of the table with his hands at his sides. He was not dressed like a victim. He was not performing pain. That made him harder to dismiss. His face carried no theatrical anger, only the exhausted steadiness of a man who had spent too long surviving to waste energy on display. The clean shirt Mama Zawadi had given him fit badly at the shoulders. One cuff was frayed. It did not matter. In that room full of tailored fabric and inherited confidence, he was the only person who looked like truth had already stripped him of everything false. Peter Njoroge was the first to speak. "Mr. Mwangi," he said. Voice dry, "This is an extraordinary allegation." Sefu looked at him without blinking. "No, it is an ordinary allegation. That is the problem. This company learned long ago how to make extraordinary harm look ordinary on paper." The old banker swallowed. One of the outside counsels adjusted her glasses and said carefully, "For the protection of all parties, I advise that any further statements be paused pending formal review." "For the protection of all parties," Sefu repeated almost softly. Where was that language when a man was framed to protect a project schedule? No one answered. Quito shoved back his chair so hard it scraped across the floor. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, not at Sefu at first, but at the room itself. "You bring us here for a succession ambush, and suddenly we're putting a homeless man on display like Baraka turned his head." "Say homeless again," he said quietly, as if that tells you what kind of man I am. The sentence landed harder than shouting could have. Quito stopped. Not out of respect. Out of unfamiliarity. He was used to fear, outrage, submission bargaining. He was not used to someone who had nothing left to lose, denying him the comfort of superiority. Sefu stepped between them before the moment could decay into another spectacle. "You will not speak to him that way," he said. Quito looked stunned, then angry, then beneath both injured. "And what way do I speak to you, father? Because apparently everyone in this room knew something except me." "That is because you never learned to look beneath surfaces," Sefu replied. "You only learned how to dominate them." The words hit Quito visibly. His nostrils flared, his hands curled. But for once he had no immediate weapon strong enough to throw back. Jelani rose next, more controlled, more dangerous. "This is manipulation," he said. "A crisis staged to override governance. Father, whatever else is in those files, none of it changes the fact that your recent behavior has destabilized the company." Tao let out a disbelieving laugh. Jelani ignored him and continued. "You disappeared. You concealed your movements. You abandoned executive communication. You allowed the board to operate under uncertainty. That alone justifies the review." Sefu nodded once. "Yes." The single word startled everyone. "Yes," he repeated. "My disappearance created uncertainty. My methods were deceptive. My silence endangered stability." He drew a breath. "And even now that is not the worst thing I have done." The boardroom shifted again. Because confession delivered without bargaining disoriented power more than defense did. Sefu opened the Makutano file and removed the executive continuation order with his own signature. "I approved the continuation of a project I did not scrutinize deeply enough," he said. "I trusted summaries. I trusted men whose incentives were speed scale and political favor. I signed while telling myself leadership required delegation. He placed the paper flat on the polished table. That signature belongs to me. So whatever judgment falls today, let it begin there. Even Mama Zawadi, who had expected honesty, seemed to brace at the nakedness of it. Baraka did not look surprised. But something in his face tightened. Not triumph, not even anger. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition that at last the man inside the empire was stepping out from behind the machinery. Jelani moved quickly to recover the room. Even if Father bears moral responsibility, he said, that does not justify this breakdown of governance. We can investigate the old project while still proceeding with interim leadership protections. The move was elegant. Separate morality from control. Preserve power while appearing reasonable. It might have worked on another day. But Tao stood before anyone else could respond. No, he said. The word was not loud, yet it cut cleanly across the table. Jelani turned toward him with visible irritation. Sit down. No. For the first time in his life, Tao did not look like the youngest son trying to borrow courage from anger. He looked like a man who had finally become too ashamed of his former self to go back. You keep doing this, Tao said. You keep turning every wound into a technicality, every betrayal into procedure, every lie into governance language. His gaze moved across the room. He's right. This family is diseased. But not because Father disappeared for a few days. Because we learned how to protect wealth before we learned how to protect people. Quito scoffed, though less confidently now. And now you're the saint. Tao looked at him. No. I'm the coward who kept waiting for someone else to be brave first. That shut him up. Tao went on, voice tightening with emotion, but not collapsing under it. I saw what you did outside the gate, Quito. I saw what Jelani tried to do with this meeting. And I saw what I've been my whole life, someone who noticed right and wrong, then hid from the cost of choosing. He swallowed once. I'm done hiding. The room went still again. Sefu felt something twist painfully inside his chest. Pride, perhaps. Grief, too. For the years wasted. For the son he had misread because he had looked for dominance when he should have been looking for conscience. One of the independent directors, a woman named Esther Wambui, turned toward Baraka. Mr. Ndlovu, she said carefully, would you be willing to tell this board in your own words what happened? Baraka's eyes moved from face to face around the table. He did not rush. He did not dramatize. He simply spoke. He spoke of site reports ignored, of false compensation lists, of warning that demolitions were moving faster than relocation, of being accused after refusing to sign altered records, of prison, of returning to find his home gone, of searching for Lindaiwe and Kamo with money he did not have and influence he never possessed, of arriving too late. He never raised his voice. That was what broke them. If he had shouted, some people might have dismissed him as emotional, but grief told plainly was harder to escape. It entered through the gaps polish could not cover. When he finished, no one spoke. A director near the middle removed his glasses and pressed fingers to his eyes. The legal counsel looked down at her notes, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Even Peter Njoroge's practiced neutrality had begun to fray. Then Baraka said one final thing. I did not come here for revenge, he said. Revenge is for people who still believe pain can be balanced neatly. I came because rich men often survive by waiting for the poor to die before the truth becomes inconvenient. He looked directly at Sefu. I am still alive. The sentence seemed to settle over the room like judgment itself. At last, Peter Njoroge cleared his throat, but his authority sounded weaker now. In light of these disclosures, he said, I am suspending the proposed executive capacity review, effective immediately. An independent investigation into the Makutano matter will be commissioned at once. All related archival material is to be preserved, and succession maneuvers frozen, Esther Wambui added sharply. Yes, Joroge said. Frozen. Jelani's face changed then. Only slightly. But enough. He understood. The elegant pathway he had built toward control had collapsed in public. This is absurd, he said. You're allowing sentiment to derail fiduciary duty. No, Esther said. We are discovering that you used fiduciary language to conceal personal ambition. Quito gave a bitter laugh. For once, I agree with the board. Jelani swung toward him. Don't pretend you're clean. I'm not, Quito shot back. But at least I never tried to have father declared incompetent while smiling about stability. The brothers looked suddenly smaller to Seifu than they ever had. Not children, not heirs, just men stripped of costume. He raised a hand. That is enough. They stopped. His next words cost him more than any of the others. Quito, he said, you are removed from all operational authority effective today, pending review of your conduct and vendor abuse. You mistook power for manhood. Quito opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked as if he had been slapped in front of strangers, which in essence he had. Jelani Seifu said, turning. You are removed from all succession consideration and referred for independent legal scrutiny regarding archival interference, trust manipulation, and attempted governance abuse. Jelani's face drained, though he fought to keep it composed. You cannot do that unilaterally. Seifu met his eyes. Watch me begin. Then Seifu looked at Tao. The room seemed to hold its breath. Tao stood still, almost bracing for reward punishment or disappointment, perhaps unsure which would wound least. You are not being given this company, Seifu said. Tao blinked. A flicker of hurt crossed his face before he could hide it. Seifu continued. Not because you are the worst of my sons, because you are the first who may still become better than what this family built into you. And that will require work, not inheritance. He glanced toward Mama Zawadi. You will begin at the Foundation Annexes, the Housing Recovery Program, and the Settlement Infrastructure Team. No title beyond what is earned. No executive privilege. Learn the cost of decisions before you ever make them again. Tao's throat moved. He nodded once. Okay. No protest, no bargaining. Just okay. It was the most mature word any of his sons had spoken all morning. Then Seifu turned to Baraka. For the first time since entering the room, his composure nearly broke. I cannot repair what was taken from you, he said. I cannot return Lindaiwe. I cannot return Kamo. I cannot undo prison humiliation, hunger, or all the years after. His voice roughened. But if you permit it, I will spend what remains of my life trying to repay a debt that should never have existed. Baraka held his gaze for a long time. What does repayment look like to a man like you? He asked. Seifu answered honestly. Not a check alone. Not charity for cameras. Full exoneration. Public acknowledgement. Compensation placed under your control, not mine. A housing and legal redress initiative for families displaced by projects like Makutano. Independent oversight. Your voice in it if you want it. And if I refuse, then I proceed anyway, Seifu said. Because justice delayed by pride is still injustice. Something softened in Baraka's face then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of one day standing near it. I won't be your decoration, he said. You will be my correction, Seifu replied. That finally drew the faintest, saddest curve at the corner of Baraka's mouth. The meeting ended without ceremony. No one reached for the prepared resolutions. No one discussed lunch. Lawyers began whispering about preservation orders and emergency disclosures. Directors filed out slower than they had entered, each carrying the unmistakable posture of people who knew they had just crossed a line beyond which the old version of the company could not survive. At the very end, only a few remained in the boardroom, Sefutao, Mama Zawadi, and Baraka. Outside the windows, the city burned gold in the afternoon light. Sefu stood beside the table where so many lies had nearly been crowned official, and looked at the three people still with him. One had kept the truth alive. One had suffered it. One had finally chosen it. For the first time in years, the future did not look safe. It looked honest. And that Sefu understood was a far better beginning. Some people spend their whole lives building towers, only to discover too late that the strongest foundation was never money, power, or reputation. It was character. Sefu learned that wealth can hide the truth, but it cannot erase it. A polished lie may survive for years, yet one honest act from a wounded soul can expose an entire empire of silence. Baraka, a man the world had thrown away, became the clearest mirror in the story. He proved that dignity does not come from status and integrity does not depend on comfort. Even after losing almost everything, he still chose honesty over bitterness. And Tao reminded us of something just as important. A person is not defined forever by weakness, fear, or past mistakes. The moment someone chooses courage, accountability, and compassion, their story can change. That is the deepest lesson of all. Justice is powerful, but true healing begins when truth is faced. Pride is broken, and the human heart chooses mercy without excusing wrongdoing. In the end, the real inheritance was never the company, the fortune, or the family name. It was the courage to become a better human being than yesterday. If this story touched you, tell us what moved you the most. Do you believe people can truly change after facing the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you